Ralph Oberg. I'm from Colorado and native raised. I've been an artist virtually my entire life. I knew as a kid that I wanted to paint pictures and make pictures, so I never had to make that decision. Well, my love of the wilderness started parallel to my love of art, but not coincident for quite a while. Simply because I didn't have any experience with the plein air type approach to work. I was still pretty much photo oriented, and I'd become aware of the work of Carl Rungus, who was, of course, one of the most revered wildlife artists in oil paint. And his work outdoors doing plein air landscapes, I began to learn the approach to direct painting from nature, not through my photographs. So I would go into the wilderness as often as possible because that was what I loved to do. Again, when I started painting the landscapes outdoors, then I started to begin to try to bring the landscape and the animals together as I admired in Carl Rungus's work. Part of my goal as an artist is to understand my subject so that it has even though I may interpret it, it still has a sense of realism, of naturalism. Understanding your subject is where science and art meet. And I am very fascinated by scientific approaches to the way we perceive the world and what reality really looks like. And you have to be out there to experience it. In 1973 or 5, drove from Denver up to Crested Butte, and there wasn't much fresh paint on the buildings in Crested Butte at the time. There was a lot of old barnwood around. The street was mud, and there weren't very many cars, and there were very few people, and most of us were hippies. Crested Butte really held on to its old Colorado charm longer than much of the state. The scenery here is heart-stopping. It is absolutely gorgeous, and for an artist, it is almost ready-made. The access roads that you can go up, the trails that you can hike. There's so much out there for us to explore and to paint that I've spent many happy days painting in this valley, and it is a special place. Only 4% of the United States could still meet the definition of wilderness. And so in 200 years or less, we had gone from virtually 100% wilderness to 4%. I like to try to communicate a sense of perhaps actually being there. That's where some of the difficulty arrives in being interpretive and being naturalistic enough that people believe what you're showing. I do like my worlds and my art to look natural, to look real, to make you feel like you're there. At the same time, I realize that a work of art cannot duplicate the experience of being there, so you have to create an emotional connection as well as this visual connection. Sometimes the emotional connection will say a lot more than the visual connection. And so a lot of that comes from the skills of design and understanding your medium and creating a perhaps somewhat false image that feels very artists learn from each other. It's a hand-me-down game. We all learn from the people that came before us. And it's a sacred obligation to pass on what you've learned from others to the next generation. The idea of designing a painting and a composition is so important, because if it's chaos, it doesn't feel good to the human sensibilities. The human mind seeks order. Chaos is uncomfortable. So we have to put some order and some structure to the chaos of nature, because nature isn't really trying to make paintings. It's giving you everything all the time, and it's constantly changing. James Joyce, the author of The Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, was the first to use the term aesthetic arrest. You know, people say it made my heart stop. Well, that's sort of the feeling you have, is this, oh my God, this is incredible. And that's what aesthetic arrest is. It's that feeling of being totally overwhelmed by the beauty of an object that just talks to your absolute soul. And it doesn't happen every time. It happens very rarely. But when it does, you know it. And that is the goal of being an artist. If you can give somebody that experience, you've done something wonderful.